It was the scent that gave it away. Not the stench of rot, though there was plenty of that in the alleyways behind the butcher shops on Wycombe Street. Not the iron tang of blood either. That was common as rain in the gutters of Newborough, where slaughterhouses pulsed like organs behind bricked facades. No, this was something else. A sweetness, like pork roasted too long, curling against the early spring frost, sickening, almost human. On the morning of February 3rd, 1875, a boy named Eli Tulloch slipped while chasing rats along the drainage trench behind Silas Grigg & Sons' fine meats. The fall blooded his knee and cracked his lantern, plunging him into flickering darkness. When he stood up, something wet brushed his cheek, hanging from a hook above the runoff pit. He thought it was a pig carcass, until he saw the hand. Eli didn't scream. He ran. By the time constables arrived, the meat was gone. Just a rusted hook swaying gently. Drips already vanished into the bloodied ice. Newborough, a soot-stained borough on the edge of East London's slaughter lanes, didn't stir easily. The people who lived here, tanners, butchers, rag-pickers, gristle-boilers, were hardened by proximity to death. Blood was a trade, not a trauma. So when Eli's story spread, it was met not with panic, but with skepticism. "Boys dreaming hogs with fingers," said one merchant. But Constable Larch, a man of few words and long silences, didn't laugh. He took the boy's torn coat, heavy with grime and fat, and stared at the crescent slash on the shoulder, as though something had scraped against it, not cut, but peeled. He sent the coat to St. Hester's Clinic for examination. The physician there, a retired battlefield surgeon named Dr. Malkin, noted something strange. Traces of tooth marks near the tear, human-sized, unmistakably molars. Wycombe Street was the kind of place the maps forgot. Narrow, always damp, its cobblestones slick with grease, even in the driest summers. 3 meat shops lined it, Griggs, Hawley's chop house, and a newly opened stall with no signage, just a curtain of black cloth over the door. Each butcher denied knowledge of anything unusual, but Grigg himself, a red-faced man with a voice like boiling tar, seemed nervous. His left hand kept flexing, blood crusted beneath the nails. When asked if any carcasses had been stolen, he barked, "Everything here is accounted for." Always is outside. A mongrel sniffed the trench and howled once, sharp, sudden, and afraid. The weather turned sharply colder that week. Frost crusted the inside of windows. Chimneys spewed thicker smoke. And yet, in the rear alley behind Griggs, the drainage steam continued to rise. Oddly warm. An inspector was sent from the city. His name was Thomas Arkwell, tall, lean, and methodical. He arrived with a cane and notebook, far too clean for the streets he walked. The locals distrusted him immediately, not just for being outsider, but because he asked questions that no one else dared voice aloud. When did Griggs last switch suppliers? Why does Hawley's sell pork on Fridays, but never have pigs delivered? Who supplies the unlabeled stall with no name? He was seen pacing behind the buildings at night, scribbling. Once, he was heard retching violently after peering into a coal chute. 2 days after Eli's discovery, something else was found. A sack, burlap, stained and half-frozen, was pulled from the Thames embankment, a mile south of Wycombe Street. Inside were bones, not pig, not cow, human. The police tried to suppress the detail, but word slipped, as it always does. A tanner's apprentice overheard the coroner whispering in disbelief, "All stripped, Every inch, not gnawed, butchered. The town started watching the butcher shops more closely. And then someone remembered an old tale. There had always been stories about Grigg's grandfather, Marlowe Grigg, founder of the shop in 1811. They said during the famine years he fed the poor when no one else could. They said his meats never spoiled, even in the height of summer. They said, strange men visited after dark, bringing crates in unmarked wagons. Of course, most chalked it up to myth, a little horror to season the sausages. But now, with bone sacks surfacing, and the scent of slow-cooked meat lingering in frozen gutters, the whispers returned. Maybe it was always this way, one midwife murmured. Maybe we've eaten what we shouldn't. Eli Tulloch stopped speaking after that week. He stared out windows and scratched at his neck until it bled. His mother said he woke screaming from dreams. Of a man in a butcher's apron, his eyes gone, but his teeth smiling. And in Grigg's shop, behind the counter, a new sign was posted. Special this week, sweet rump roast, no questions, half price. By the following Monday, the story had reached every cracked window and every market stall in Newborough. Not through headlines, no paper dared print it, but by breathless retellings over boiled tea and morning ash. They found a boy's jawbone in a sausage casing, they did. No, 3 ribs, cleaned clean, tied like a roast. Each version got darker, bloodier, further from the truth, and yet somehow closer to a shared unease that none dared name aloud, that something had been going on in Newborough for far longer than anyone wanted to believe. At Alma's millinery, old Mrs. Gwynn told a customer she'd always avoided Grigg's, ever since Marlowe's day. Too clean, that counter. Not natural, a stonecutter's wife recounted how her youngest used to wake with night sweats after eating Hawley's pies. Even the pastor at St. Timothy's parish broke from his usual calm on Sunday morning, thundering about the perversion of God's creatures, and that sin stinks before it is seen. No one said the word cannibalism. Not yet. But it hung, there, unspoken, like frost before a storm. The first official crack came from Registrar Aldwyn Malvern, who kept birth and death records for the district. On February 9th, he filed a quiet note to his superior at the borough office. Sir, I have noted an unusual variance in reported deaths this quarter. Specifically, a total of 27 missing persons logged as runaways between October 1874 and January 1875, all adults aged 15 to 40. Only 3 burial permits granted for unidentified remains in the same period. No inquests held for any of the runaways. This discrepancy may be clerical, but I respectfully request review. A. Malvern, Registrar of Deaths, Newborough Division. The letter was stamped and shelved in file number 398C. It was never answered. Others noticed patterns too. A chimney sweep named Jory Pike claimed that smoke from Grigg's shop chimney ran thicker at night than in daylight hours. Greasier, like cooking fat. A schoolteacher recalled that 3 students had vanished the prior autumn, all orphans from St. Mildred's home, all regular errand boys to the butcher's. The matron at St. Mildred's, a stern woman named Sister Elva, insisted they'd simply run off or been adopted, but could provide no papers, no names of new guardians, no addresses, just gone. And in the back pews of the church, rumours twisted into something more primal. Whispers about meat that made you dream, about phantom cries from the empty shop stalls after sundown, about a smiling man with a bone-handled cleaver who walked between walls. Inspector Arkwell kept digging. He was methodical, even as locals began avoiding him. His inquiries made shopkeepers twitchy. Children crossed the street when he passed. Still, he gathered what he could. From the tax archive, he pulled Grigg & Sons delivery receipts for 1874. Outwardly normal: lamb, pig, cow. But a strange detail surfaced. In November alone, over 620 pounds of offal were received, but only 214 pounds sold, according to shop ledger. The rest? Discarded, Grigg claimed. Arkwell noted the inconsistency. And the dates. 2 of the missing persons reports aligned precisely with the heaviest offal delivery days. In his notebook, he circled both dates in red. Meanwhile, Eli Tulloch's mother, Agnes, sought help from the local physician. Eli had stopped sleeping. He paced at night, muttering to himself, often stopping to sniff at things: furniture, pillows, even her hands. Dr. Malkin found scratches on the roof of Eli's mouth, like something had been forced down it. He asked if the boy had eaten anything unusual. Agnes only shook her head. Nothing but stew. The next day she emptied the pantry and refused to cook anything she couldn't identify by bone. And then there was the map. At the back of Carter's Pawn and Curios, Arkwell found a roll of municipal layouts from 1821, used for the initial gaslight installations. The alley behind Grigg's shop had once been part of a larger property, owned by none other than Marlowe Grigg himself. At the bottom of the map, written in faded brown ink, "Primary chute to central drain, sealed 1833. Private access shaft, MG, remains open under license private access." A tunnel. He returned to Wycombe Street that night, alone, and paced the alley until he found it. A metal hatch, warped and painted over. He marked it with chalk and walked away, slowly, though his hands were shaking. He would not return until daylight. The next morning a horse's head was found in Arkwell's boarding-house yard. Not butchered, not cleaned, just placed neatly on the doorstep. The message was clear, and still the rumors spread. In the market square, the old men spoke in half-truths. "Ain't the first time Bones turned up strange, you know. My da used to say, 'Never eat nothing without a hoof on it.' Grigg's father had an eye missing, from what he saw, not what he lost." At the White Pike Tavern, a drunk midwife claimed she once helped birth a child, with teeth already in its gums, biting before breathing. At the wash-house, the women compared scars, small ones, on arms or hips, places they couldn't remember being cut. One said she once found a bite mark inside her own thigh, raw and new. But she lived alone. She never spoke of it again. Some turned to faith, others to fasting. But most simply stopped asking. They ate boiled cabbage and fish. They nodded when meat was offered, but took none home. They whispered warnings to children and locked their doors tight. And in the windows above Wycombe Street, candlelight began to vanish earlier each night, as if the dark was safer than what flickered inside. The Grigg family had been in meat for 3 generations. Their name first appears in the 1820 London Tax Gazette, listed under Marlowe Grigg, licensed animal processor, Wycombe Street, Borough 3B. At the time, the area was little more than a swamp of bloodletting yards and smokehouses, but Marlowe carved out a business through ruthless pricing and, allegedly, no small amount of intimidation. A later issue of the Ledger of Tradesmen Fines, 1834, notes a warning issued to Marlowe for unsanitary disposal of refuse into communal well drains, but no formal penalty was recorded. He died in 1841, just 2 years after the Suspicious Death Act began enforcing forensic reviews in industrial cases. His body, curiously, was never autopsied. The cause? Stroke, advanced age. He was 52. His son, Randall Grigg, inherited the shop and continued the family trade with quiet precision. Known to keep few friends and fewer accounts, Randall lived in the flat above the storefront with his wife Joanna and their only child, Silas, who would eventually inherit the business himself in 1868. Silas, now in his early 40s, bore none of the rugged appearance of his forebears. Photographs taken in 1872 for a local merchant's registry show a man pale and narrow, with sunken eyes and a strangely thin neck, almost as if the weight of his lineage pressed down from within. He was known in the borough, not for his charm, but for his peculiar habits. He walked only after sundown, spoke little during business, and never allowed apprentices behind the rear curtain of the shop. This final detail had long been chalked up to pride or a butcher's superstition. But by 1875, it had taken on a new and dreadful implication. Inspector Arkwell, still investigating quietly, obtained access to a retired clerk named Jebediah Lunn, who had briefly kept Grigg's books during a 1870 audit. Lunn, now aged and rheumatic, sat with Arkwell in the back room of the Masonic Lodge and spoke only after confirming the inspector carried no press connections. He said this: "There were always discrepancies. Orders that didn't match weights, receipts for preserved meat with no salt purchases. I asked once, just once," Silas said. "Some things don't tally on paper. Only on the table." I quit 3 days later, still had dreams. Bone dreams. When Arkwell inquired about the Grigg residence, Lunn pointed to a floor plan he'd sketched years ago from memory. It showed a narrow stairwell leading from the shop into a windowless back room, and then, oddly, another stair, descending below street level. "He called it the curing room," Lunn whispered, "but it was always cold. Too cold. No fire, no stove, just salt and something else, something wet." In an effort to confirm the structure, Arkwell requested access to borough housing archives held in a cramped cellar beneath the guild office. There, he located Lot 14B, the property assigned to Grigg & Sons since 1811. 2 building permits had been submitted over the decades. Permit number 0049, 1800-26, for construction of reinforced stone chamber beneath primary shop floor. Purpose: meat aging and winter storage. Permit number 1087, 1869, for expansion of cellars and installation of private drainage chute to existing outflow. Notably, this permit was marked with an override from Councilman Percival Tobb, later convicted of bribery in an unrelated case. The dimensions listed for the cellar expansion showed a depth of 12 feet and a width of 7 feet. But several builders' notations mentioned internal sub-walls not drawn to scale. No updated floor plans were ever filed. The townspeople, for their part, viewed the Griggs as distant, not malevolent. Joanna, Silas's mother, was remembered only vaguely. Sharp jaw, always in black, never spoke above a whisper. Some said she was foreign, but no one knew from where. She vanished from public record in 1854, with no death certificate, marriage relocation, or grave. When asked, Silas claimed she'd retired to the coast. No one ever saw her again. The local baker, Marta Cress, recalled delivering bread to the Grigg house as a girl. Once, while waiting for Silas to retrieve coin, she glanced into the hallway and saw 4 aprons hanging on pegs, but the house was meant to hold only 2 people at the time. None of them fit a woman, she said, and one was too small for a grown man. She was told never to come back. In a stack of old receipts from the New Borough School Board, a curious name reappeared twice. Ernest Grigg, listed as guardian for 2 students in 1867 and 1869, respectively. No one in the borough recalled any Ernest Grigg. No birth record exists, no tax filings, no military service, yet the school logs show the same address, Wycombe Street, Lot 14B, and the same signature, in a firm, angular hand. When shown the signature, Silas denied knowing it. He said simply, "There was never an Ernest." The headmaster at the time, a Reverend Hallett, now deceased, once wrote a marginal note in the 1869 ledger. "Ernest always arrives after dusk, smells faintly of smoke and vinegar." The final strange thread came from an apprentice chimney sweep named Wilf, who worked the flue routes along Wycombe in January. He recalled climbing the stack above Grigg's and finding something lodged deep inside, not blocking soot or ash, but draped like cloth. He pulled it loose with a wire. It was a piece of heavy canvas, burned at the edges. On it, drawn in soot and oil, was the outline of a human handprint, fingers splayed. Inside the palm, 3 tally marks. He threw it away, but he remembered the weight. It wasn't fabric. It was skin-thick now. In the dim silence of his boarding house, Arkwell began to organize his findings into what he called the Grigg file. It contained 6 missing persons reports within 1 block of Wycombe Street, a floor plan with undocumented staircases, 2 ambiguous building permits, 4 separate eyewitness accounts of extra family members, a signature that didn't belong to anyone who existed, and 1 canvas handprint retrieved from a chimney never listed on the registry. He didn't know what it all meant, but he suspected that the Grigg family was larger, older, and far stranger than it appeared, and perhaps, he began to wonder, not entirely human. The first event occurred on February 17th, 1875, during morning mass at St. Timothy's Parish. The congregation had gathered as usual, roughly 40 in attendance, seated on hard pine benches beneath soot-dimmed glass. It was cold that morning, with wind scraping through the cracks in the nave, and the gaslight flickered even before the sermon began. The hymn books smelled of mildew. Coal smoke clung to every coat and collar. Midway through the reading, Isaiah 58, the passage on false fasting. Marjorie Till, age 9, stood up from her seat near the 3rd pew and began to hum. Not loudly, but clearly. A low, droning note, dissonant, hollow. Her mother tried to hush her, but Marjorie continued, eyes open yet unfocused, gaze fixed on the altar. The note rose in pitch. Her lips didn't move. Still, the sound came, impossibly layered, like 2 voices humming in harmony from one throat. Then came the words. 3 bodies, 14 cuts, carried beneath in salted ruts. She repeated it 3 times, then collapsed. The doctor who examined her found no evidence of fever, no trauma, no convulsion marks. Her heartbeat was steady. She remembered nothing, except a dream about something red walking in the cellar. She was sent home with valerian root and told to rest. By sundown, she had forgotten the entire event. The priest, however, did not. Father Langdon wrote a letter, never mailed, addressed to Archdiocese Supervisor Bishop Hale, now preserved in the St. Timothy's basement archive. It reads in part, "I have served 22 winters in this borough, and witnessed much spiritual unrest, but never such precision in madness." What the child said, those words, felt planted, like a phrase recalled, not imagined. I fear this is not of God, nor wholly of this world. I request guidance, and, failing that, absolution. The letter was dated February 18th. Father Langdon would be found dead in his bed less than 3 weeks later. Heart failure, they said, but his rosary beads were snapped in half, as if pulled tight. Word of the event spread. The townsfolk, already uneasy, grew taut with suspicion. Some blamed gas leaks, others whispered about dreaming meat, claiming those who had eaten Griggs roasts were acting strange, forgetting names, walking at night, staring at nothing. One man, Horace Bell, a knacker from Barrow Lane, was seen eating coal from his own fireplace. When stopped, he screamed that it tasted like mother's ribs. He was taken to Braywick Asylum, where he later gouged out both eyes with a fork. No one could say how he'd gotten the utensil. His final journal entry, smuggled out by a nurse, read, "They cook in the dark. The bones are blue when fresh." The second incident involved a fire. On February 21st, the shop of Rogers and Tuis Tannery caught flame in the early hours, lighting the sky above the borough in a column of oily black smoke. But when firemen arrived, they found no flames, only smoke, thick, acrid, choking. The walls were intact, no visible damage. And yet, when the door was opened, every mirror inside had shattered, and the water in the wash-basin had boiled dry. The tannery's nightman, Levi Wrench, was found curled in a cupboard, dead of asphyxiation. His body was untouched by burns, but the skin on his arms had tightened, drawn inward, as if cooked from within. One of the firemen vomited upon entering. Another refused to speak afterward at all, retiring that very week. On the wall of the supply room, someone had written, perhaps in Greece, perhaps not, 7 block letters, CURING. Inspector Arkwell's notes began to take a darker tone. He wrote of changes in the borough's atmosphere, not merely metaphorical, but physical. Bread spoiled faster, lamps flickered even with full oil, dogs barked into corners. On the 23rd, he observed that pigeons had stopped landing on Wycombe Street entirely, avoiding rooftops they once nested in. He collected testimony from 3 residents who claimed to see shadows pass behind the Griggs' upper windows long after the shop had closed. One described the figure as tall, bent, and carrying something like a butcher's cradle. Another said it moved wrong, like its legs were backward. None of the witnesses knew each other. A breakthrough came from a local historian, Miss Geraldine Voss, who maintained personal records on every trade family in the borough. She had once tried to catalogue the Griggs, birth dates, marriages, apprenticeships, but had abandoned the effort due to what she called record friction. Every time I found a source, it contradicted the last. Baptism dates were doubled. Census forms listed different people with the same name. At one point, I found a wedding certificate for Silas dated 1862. But in the church ledger, he's listed as the officiant, not the groom. She showed Arkwell a letter, postmarked 1856, addressed to Marlowe Grigg, from an unknown sender. "You owe us 10. The last batch was too clean. There is no story in clean meat. They must have memory. The tongues matter. The eyes help. You know this, there was no signature. Arkwell's hand shook as he transcribed it. The unexplainable was no longer subtle. It had become ritualistic, predictable. Every 3 days, an incident. A butcher's scale turned to ash overnight. A gaslight exploded but left no glass shards. A child drew a map of tunnels no one taught her. The sense of being watched grew, not from any single window, but from the walls themselves, as though the buildings remembered. On the night of February 26th, the bell at St. Timothy's tolled 13 times, unbidden, unguided. It had not been rung in over 6 years. The rope had snapped in 1869. When Father Langdon's successor climbed the tower, he found the rope rebraided, though no new rope had been ordered, and burned into the bell's inner rim, as though seared by hand. They were always meat. The borough was no longer simply frightened. It was in retreat. Windows were boarded, doors were triple-bolted, meat sales dropped to nearly nothing, and yet Griggs remained open, the curtain drawn as always, the chalkboard changed daily. The shop was never seen taking deliveries, and yet the shelves were always full, and the scent, sweet, charred, and wet, lingered stronger than ever. By March 1st, 1875, the borough of Newborough was not merely uneasy, it was coming apart. The events of February had left invisible fractures in the streets, friendships frayed, churches emptied, commerce stalled, families once bound by generations of barter and blood began boarding their windows and sending their children inland. The market square fell quiet, save for the scraping of handcarts and the anxious toll of the lamplighters' shoes. And in awe, the centre of this slow collapse stood Wycombe Street, unassuming, narrow, and utterly avoided. The postmaster refused to deliver there. Bread boys left loaves at the end of the lane. A midwife, Martha Blythe, reportedly quit her practice after being asked to assist at number 14B. She told a neighbour, in a voice so half-broken, "No, child born in that house carries a soul she was not seen again." On March 3rd, the disappearance of Elias Fern, a coal-meter reader for the gasworks office, marked a shift from rumour to open dread. His final known appointment was logged at Grigg & Sons, Lot 14B, at 10:42 a.m., per the brass-punched meter card found in his logbook. The device had recorded gas flow consistent with a single lantern running. Elias never left the premises. His tools were discovered 2 days later behind the property's drainage trench, wrapped in butcher's paper, stamped clearly with the Grigg family crest. The shop, when questioned, claimed ignorance. Arkwell demanded a search. The magistrate declined to issue the warrant. That same week, something else vanished. Sound. Multiple residents living within 100 yards of Wycombe Street reported the same phenomena. At irregular hours, all noise would cease. No footfalls, no carts, no birds. Even the whistle of coal trains became muffled, like wool pressed against the ears. It would last minutes. Then, just as suddenly, the world would resume. A tanner's apprentice timed one such event. Exactly 1 minute, 47 seconds. He noted the precise start at 4:06 p.m. His candle flame did not flicker during that time, though the air turned cold. When asked what he heard in the silence, he replied, "I didn't hear nothing, sir. I heard waiting." On March 5th, Arkwell acted without permission. At 4 a.m., under cover of fog and with a stolen locksmith's bit, he broke the hatch behind the Grigg shop and descended into the original storage cellar, first licensed in 1826. He carried a lantern, a rope, and a single notebook. What he found would not be officially recorded, not in police logs, not in court, not in any archive. But his journal, sealed in the police archive box B1121, includes the following entry.
March 5th, pre-dawn. Beneath the ground. It is not one room. It is a warren. 7 corridors, all brick, aged, curved walls with soot char. Some etched, not names, cuts, like tallies. Hooks hang from iron beams, old meat hooks, warped. One room had shelving, lined with glass jars, maybe 40 in all, each labelled with numbers, not names, all contents submerged in clear solution. Saw what I believe was a thumb in one, a tongue in another. 2 child-size boots, sealed together in a third. Far chamber inaccessible, stone door marked curing. On the wall nearby, written in coal or blood, "Don't bury what feeds you." Am shaking, rope damp when I pulled it up. Need to rest. Will return with escort he never did. On March 6th, Inspector Arkwell went missing. His boarding house room was found neatly made, window latched, door locked from the inside. His coat, boots, and hat remained in place. A plate of uneaten potatoes and boiled egg sat on the side table, untouched. The only oddity, his lantern, filled with melted lard, not oil. No trace of forced entry. His notes, however, were gone, except for one torn page found beneath the mattress. Silas Grigg is not the butcher. He is the last servant of the market fear took hold in full. Children were pulled from school. St. Timothy's shuttered its chapel. A spontaneous town council formed, unofficial but fiercely active. They delivered a demand to the Grigg property. Cease business immediately. Vacate the premises. The next morning, a new sign appeared in Grigg's window. Open late, fresh cuts, always. That night, the remaining council members gathered to organize a search of the premises. They chose a leader, a former Marine, Captain Merrick Dole, and planned to enter before dawn. They never arrived. Instead, their torches were found laid in a line across Wycombe Street, still lit, but no bodies in sight. A child later claimed to see a man carrying a bag with feet, but when pressed, said she may have dreamed it. By March 9th, only one man remained unshaken, a gravedigger named Obadiah Grice, who had buried half the town's dead and feared nothing above the earth. He marched to the edge of Wycombe Street with a spade and a hammer and said he'd end the matter himself. He was last seen entering Grigg's shop at 3:12 p.m. At 3:34 p.m., all the crows in the borough lifted from their roosts and flew west in a black stream, silent, fast, and unnatural. At 3:49 p.m., a rain of sawdust fell across the eastern rooftops for nearly 7 minutes. At 4:01 p.m., a cow in the Tanner's Square was born dead, though it had not been pregnant. The next day, a single crate was delivered to the parish steps, wooden, sealed with wax, no markings. Inside, Obadiah's boots, stuffed with meat, wrapped in parchment. On the parchment, in a hand not quite human. We don't fear the earth. We just wait longer. The meat returns, Newborough broke, families fled, homes were abandoned. The pump at East Lane was found stuffed with jawbones, though none were animal. By month's end, the population had dropped by half. And yet, through it all, Grigg's remained open. Each night, the chalkboard changed. Each morning, the window was freshly washed. No one saw Silas. No one saw anyone. But the meats were always stocked.
And the scent, that sweet, greasy, rotting scent, never left. The borough of Newborough was in retreat, but history, like blood through a cracked floorboard, has a way of resurfacing. And in the absence of answers, it was the archivists who began to whisper. One of them was Miss Edith Clements, assistant clerk to the Borough Records Office since 1861. She rarely left the stone rooms beneath the old Guildhall, where mildewed books and parchment scrolls lined the walls like skin. It was she who first noticed a series of historical parallels, spaced decades apart, each echoing what now unfolded in 1875. The clue was found in the minutes of the Borough Sanitation Commission, 1823, an otherwise mundane book, but marked in the margin with an inked annotation. Request to reseal the Grigg drain. Odours worse than 13. Report of unusual ash in meat house coals. Infant jaw found in drain filter. Family refuses inspection. There was no follow-up, just a signature. E. Welling, City Surveyor. Miss Clements traced the reference to an earlier document, a petition from 1813, signed by 12 residents. The language was hesitant, but the claim was clear. We, of Borough Section 3, do fear the continued placement and activity of Mr. M. Grigg. We find it suspect that no funerals are held in his family, and that their shop never closes, not even on Good Friday. Further, the cries heard under the grating on Ash Lane persist without end. We request a moral inspection. The final phrase was peculiar. Moral inspection. Not legal, not structural. It was denied. Digging deeper, Clements located a weathered ledger labeled Church Dispensations and Last Rites, 1788 to 1820, compiled by Deacon Hobb of St. Timothy's predecessor chapel. It recorded several strange rites granted to members of the Grigg household, though no names were listed, just initials S.G., E.G., M.G., and J.G. Each received extreme unction, the Catholic last rite, despite being members of a Protestant community. Even odder, each ceremony was conducted at night. In one entry, the deacon scrawled, "Request was for anointing of the living." Said the meat inside needed blessing before winter. At the back of the same book was a folded letter, bound into the spine with twine. Its ink was faded, but still legible. It was addressed to a man named Tolliver Shue, a known contemporary of William Blake, and a rare spiritualist writer of the early 1800s. The letter reads, "You spoke of the inward market and the belief that consumption is not a process, but a covenant. I believe I have found its stewards. In the meat district, east of Borough proper, a lineage lives that does not change. They sell flesh, but not to feed, to remember. I stood above their chute and heard it, the chewing in the dark. When they die, they do not decay. They brine themselves, come south, bring salt, and prayers, it is unsigned." In a back room of the Museum of Curious and Morbid Sciences, an independent archive off Bermondsey Street, another fragment surfaced. A former coroner's assistant, Quinton Hale, now elderly and half-mad, offered a record to a university researcher in 1872 in exchange for gin. It was labelled only Case File 1841, Infant Jars, Borough Sea District, locked. Inside, sketches of glass vessels, each containing what appeared to be fetal remains, partially developed, stored in brine. The specimens were labelled only with Grigg family initials, followed by dates. One jar had an annotation. E.G., still moving after 72 hours in cold. The coroner's signature was scratched out, the page torn and re-glued to a different folder. That folder had been misfiled under pest control orders. The most damning artifact came not from the archives, but from a private estate. A retired solicitor, Mr. Halbridge Trunnell, had purchased a set of carved oak panels from a Grigg-owned property in 1859, when parts of the original slaughterhouse were being demolished. For years, he used the wood as part of a drawing-room cabinet, until, during sanding, he uncovered burned inscriptions beneath the varnish. The engravings were crude, but unmistakable. Every cut remembers, every slice is a sermon. Eat what was once witness, become the archive. He documented the panels in his diary, and submitted a sealed statement to the Society for Historical and Occult Allegories, who declined to investigate. Trunnell died in 1874 after choking on a rabbit bone. No autopsy was performed. The rabbit had no bones when prepared. Meanwhile, the last official trace of Silas Grigg appears in a logbook of the London Butchers' Guild. It records a fine imposed in January 1875 for failure to display origin markings and refusal to admit guild inspectors. Fine, £2, waived upon written complaint. Remark: he said the meat had no origin. It was born in the brine. A final anomaly surfaced through Dr. Ruthven Moore, a visiting anthropologist from Bonn, who had travelled to London that spring to study working-class mortuary customs. He had taken an interest in Griggs after hearing rumours of corpse-like meat sold by the quarter. Posing as a customer, he visited the shop and bought a parcel labelled "Loin, Unclaimed, Mild Cure." When he returned to his boarding house and unwrapped it, he found the cut anatomically wrong. Not pig, not cow. Shaped like a human shoulder, but inverted and flensed. He boiled it as part of a preservation study. At the 67-minute mark, the flesh pulsed once and released a high-pitched exhalation, as if steam escaping a throat. He destroyed the meat in the fireplace and wrote only one line in his field journal. It remembered being held. Miss Clements, compiling her findings, noted in her closing letter to the borough office: if these accounts are taken in total, a pattern emerges, not of madness, but of memory. The Grigg family is not a bloodline, but a function. They do not merely butcher, they preserve. And what they preserve speaks. She attached her notes in a parcel, tied it shut, and labelled it "For any who outlive them." The parcel is still sealed, resting today in the Borough Library's Rare Materials Vault, stamped across the twine. Do not warm. On the evening of March 14th, 1875, the sky above New Borough turned the colour of boiled fat, grey-green and low, pressing down upon rooftops with a pressure more felt than seen. A chalky film coated the east-facing windows. Horses refused to move past Wycombe Street, balking and wheezing. Somewhere deep below the cobblestones, a rumble began. It would last through the night. This is when the final horror began, not as an event, but as an unfolding. And it started with the opening of a box. Edward Bramble, an amateur folklorist from Cambridge, had been dispatched by his patron, Lady Winifred Torless, to document the social collapse of New Borough as a case study in post-industrial psychological decay. Bramble had arrived that week, unaware of the full history, armed only with a journal, a borrowed revolver, and a list of names. By mid-March, most of the names were already dead, missing, or silent, except one. Agnes Tulloch, mother of Eli, the boy who had first seen them meet with a hand. She now lived in near total seclusion, her windows sealed with tar paper, her breath visible even indoors. Bramble found her seated in a wooden chair, hands bound in wool cloth. She agreed to speak. Her only request, "If you record this, you keep your own teeth in your mouth." "Don't eat while you write," he complied. She told Bramble of Eli's silence, which had grown into something more calculated. The boy now slept standing. He never blinked during daylight, and he had begun to hum, low and rhythmic, when near raw meat, any kind, even fish. She showed Bramble the drawings Eli had etched into his floorboards using a spoon, rings of figures, hook-limbed and faceless, walking into a black pit marked Mother. She gave Bramble a box. Inside were 10 pages, brittle and stained, torn from what appeared to be a logbook or sermon ledger. No title, no author. But every page bore the same watermark, G14, the Grigg family lot number. The entries read more like instructions than notes. We do not cook to nourish. We cook to seal. Boil for memory, brine for voice. Cut the face last. It keeps the gaze, no more than 10 per feast. Flesh weeps if shared too widely. Burn the marrow, it dreams. Smoke makes the record. Smoke makes the choir. And on the last page, the cellar is not for storing. It is the mouth. We do not butcher, we translate. Bramble fled the house before sunset. He wrote of the encounter in a fragmented entry, now held in the Torless papers, Box 9, Folder D. I am no longer confident the Griggs are men. I think they are a memory, wearing men as jars wear pickles, and I believe Newborough was never meant to survive them, but to feed them. That night, Bramble joined 3 other locals who had resolved to enter the Grigg property. They carried axes, oil, and a folded parish cross. Only one would return. At 2:03 a.m., smoke began to rise from Lot 14B. Not fire, smoke without flame, thick and bone-coloured, billowing upward from the very soil behind the shop. The windows shattered outward, not inward. Witnesses claimed to see figures pressed against the glass, unmoving, mouths open, as if in mid-howl, but no sound emerged. The one survivor, Constable Ewan Cripps, was found walking backward in the alley at dawn, eyes shut tight, muttering only, "It remembers you if you look. It puts you in the stew. I'm already half-written." He was committed to Colney Hatch Asylum the next day. On his boots, traces of black salt, not found anywhere else in the borough. As the sun rose on March 15th, the town square was empty, but Wycombe Street was still warm, and in the ruins of the Grigg storefront, collapsed at the rear, roof caved in. A hatch remained intact, rusted but unbroken. A parish volunteer, Mrs. Enna Field, later claimed to see a figure step up from it, clad in wax-stiffened butcher's cloth, eyes milky and hands bare. In each palm, a coin. She turned to run. When she returned with others, there was no figure. But a note nailed to the alley gate read, "There is still room on the hooks." We have new recipes. Memory is best when it screams. The collapse of the property was recorded officially as structural failure due to flooding in lower foundation. No further investigation occurred. The land was never resold. The cellars were sealed in 1877, with concrete poured at night by labourers who refused to return a second day. No headstones exist for the Griggs, no known heirs. But on a still night, when the wind curls off the Thames just right, some say you can hear the clink of cleavers from beneath the paving stones. And sometimes, just sometimes, the smell returns, sweet, warm, and waiting. In the decades following the spring of 1875, Wycombe Street slowly vanished from official record. Its buildings, deemed unsound, were razed between 1878 and 1883, though no contractor ever stayed past 2 days. The London Borough maps of 1891 show the space as blank, labelled only Proposed Redevelopment Site, Unused. It was never redeveloped. The Grigg property itself, Lot 14B, was declared municipal dead ground in 1884, a designation usually reserved for plague pits and sacrificial lands. In city archives, a single line explains the decision. Foundation integrity compromised by unknown residue. Ventilation impossible. No monument was erected. No fence surrounds the lot. Only a low iron plate, flush with the dirt, stamped with 5 digits. 18753. No one has ever confirmed what the number signifies. By 1897, only 4 residents of Old New Borough remained alive, who remembered the spring of 75. 3 refused interviews. The 4th, Mrs. Enna Field, the parish volunteer who saw the figure emerge from the Grigg hatch, agreed to speak with a young reporter for the Evening Chronicle. Her words were recorded in shorthand, then sealed by editorial order. The following excerpt, uncensored, survives in the Hastings Archive of Folkloric Catastrophe. Box 43. It wasn't a man what came up. It had bones, yes, a face of sorts, but not one. God made. I don't think the Griggs were ever born. I think they were collected, like fat into tallow, poured into a name. And what they fed us? It wasn't about meat. It was about remembrance. That place was a library. And we were its paper as she died 6 days later from advanced neurotic degeneration. No family claimed her body. In 1902, a bricklayer named Jacob Flint was assigned to oversee repairs on a sewage line that passed beneath the old borough edge. While mapping the route, he discovered an unlisted tunnel, 12 feet below surface grade, lined with red stone and sealed with iron crossbars. At the threshold, he claimed to hear moaning, not pained, but deliberate, rhythmic. He reported it to Borough Engineering. His supervisor told him to fill it and forget it. Jacob never returned to work. His diary, retrieved posthumously, includes this entry. We've been building above them. Not over bones, over mouths. A year later, a new school was constructed 3 blocks east of the former Wycombe site. Within its first semester, 4 children disappeared, all during recess. Their shoes were found stacked neatly in the boiler room. There was no sign of forced entry. No child was ever found. The school was closed after a 5th child, Beatrice Milne, reappeared in her seat one morning during lessons. She would not speak. She would not eat. She would only draw, hooks, rows of them, over and over, until her fingers bled through the charcoal. She was removed from the classroom and placed in care. That same year, her nurse reported waking to find Beatrice standing at the foot of her bed, whispering, "They opened the cellar." It still remembers us. They're learning new recipes. And so, the story, like the borough, was buried, not erased, but interred, beneath misfiled documents, botched permits, lost maps, and the sheer weight of disbelief. Yet, small anomalies persist. In 1939, a fire inspector auditing modern gas lines noted that the Wycombe region, now overgrown and unused, registered a constant ambient temperature of 32 degrees Celsius, even during frost. In 1964, a group of amateur historians attempted to excavate the old Grigg lot. their equipment corroded, their tent collapsed. One member, Stuart Hendley, was found days later wandering near Limehouse, speaking only one phrase: "The stew boils when no one's watching." He died of internal rupture. His stomach was empty. In recent years, a few researchers have returned to the tale. Most leave quickly. Some deny its existence altogether. But a handful persist: archivists, skeptics, wanderers. They collect artifacts, scraps of ledgers, misattributed photos, charred meat wrappings, etched hooks on stones found yards from where the old Grigg storefront stood. And from these fragments, one pattern emerges. The Grigg Market was not a butcher's shop. It was a catalogue, a place where memory was processed, cured, and consumed. Every cut a record, every meal a binding. And, perhaps, we were never customers at all. We were ingredients. As of today, the area once called Wycombe Street remains unmarked. No buildings, no signage. But sometimes, those who walk nearby report a scent, faint and oddly comforting, like meat stewing in onion and spice. And beneath it, something else, something familiar, as if you've smelled it before but can't remember when, or what it was, only that you may have eaten it. No one talks about the Grigg family now. But every cellar in town has one hook no one will touch. If you've made it this far, you now carry a sliver of Newborough's memory, the story of the Grigg family, their meat market, and what may or may not have lived beneath their cellar was never printed in the city's official history. But the land still remembers, the hooks still hang, and the scent. It returns when no one is watching. History doesn't always bury its dead. Sometimes it brines them, and the real question remains: how many stories have we already eaten without knowing the name? Subscribe for more explorations into history's darkest corners, where forgotten files, sealed cellars, and unspoken rituals still wait to be uncovered. Let us know in the comments, what's your theory? Were the Griggs a family of men, or something far older, and still listening? Coming soon. 1906, the bell tower that rang after the town was gone. A vanished mining village, a church with no congregation, and a tower whose bell rings every year, on the exact day 42 children were buried, but never found.